Chevra, how are you? I hope everyone is gesund, stark, unfehlig, begashmis beruchnis. I hope everyone is healthy, strong, and happy physically and spiritually. Today is Erev Parshas Shabbos Vayeira. We're going to speak today a continuation of what we spoke last week. Last week, I mentioned that the story of Avraham fighting the four kings and what lesson we learned from that. But I mentioned how that had a tremendous impact on Lot, and I said we'll leave it for another date. So I decided we'll discuss it this week because actually it's connected to a story of this week's Parsha. But before that, as usual, we'll start with a prayer, and as we explained last week at length, the first pasuk in Kapitel Peites, Maskil Eison Hoezrochi. We explained that according to Chassidus, this verse is profound. Without Chassidus, it's just a matter of statement, the fact that this kapitel, the following chapter of Tilim, was written by Avraham Avinu. And Rashi says that it's referring to Avraham. Eison Hoezrochi, the strong one who came from the east. But according to Chassidus, what we're talking about over here is maskil, something which illuminates and brings enlightenment. Ha'eson ha'ezrochi, eson means strength. Strength goes into on the essence of the Jewish soul. His yichida shebenefesh, his power to be completely selfless and transcend limitations. Ha'ezrochi comes from the word shine, and that should illuminate my entire being. So the prayer, basically, maskil eson ha'ezrochi, is a prayer to Hashem that my Jewishness, my Jewish consciousness, should be very healthy and strong. And the deepest levels of my empowerment and strength should be revealed and alive and healthy and well in me. That's the prayer, that's the request. So last week I spoke about Avraham Avinu as a kindness warrior. Now I don't know if it was so clear, so therefore I'm going to clarify again just for 2 seconds. What I meant to say about a kindness warrior was two things. Number one, that he's a warrior as a personality. Avraham is just not some mild-mannered, meek, vulnerable, soft person. Even though that's all could be also channeled as a positive thing. But just understand, like in other words, not some what we call peace-loving pacifist. No, that's not what Avraham is. Avraham's kindness, and he is the kindest person, comes from a powerful conviction, comes from a sense of values, comes from his being connected to the Eibishter. So that's number one. He's a kindness warrior, is coming from a strong personality in a good way, in the best way. Second of all, kindness warrior means that you're actively doing kindness. I didn't say this last week, but just we're going to add something new right here about the beginning of the Parsha. Without elaborating, the story in the beginning is that Avraham had circumcised himself, and then he was weak, and Hashem made the sun go out and be a very hot day, so there shouldn't be any passerbys, so that Avraham shouldn't have to work hard. But then the Eibishter saw the way Avraham was so upset that he made guests come, and Avraham was able to exercise his kindness. So from this we see the concept, and we mentioned this many times, of what does it mean, teva hatoiv lehetiv. The nature of good is to do good. Just by a person being good, that goodness, so to speak, is from within him, and he has a kind heart, that's not enough. That doesn't really prove the point. A good person has to be a do-gooder. You have to actually do it. And if not, you feel like you're missing. That's why we said many times the word from the previous Rabbi, he said, a day which you don't do another Jew a favor, in the physical sense, is not a day. So in other words, imagine you're a person, and this is the way you're meant to live your life, that how do I measure a good day? You know what's a good day? A good day is a day that I did something for another. Actually, not only a good day, what is a day? Only a day which I did a favor for another physically. So that's the story in the beginning of the Parsha with Avraham Avinu. That's a warrior, a kindness warrior. That means he's doing goodness. Not if it just comes knocking on his door. He's seeking, he's searching, where is there a place where it needs my help? And therefore I have to activate and exercise my goodness muscle, so to speak. That means you're a good person. And that's a kindness warrior. It's on the offensive, so to speak. It's proactive. A kindness warrior is proactive. And now we'll speak about another point. We'll take a pause and I'll add it later. We'll soon see. Now, in this week's Parsha, we come to the story in the beginning, as I just said 2 seconds ago, about the angels that came and Avraham did the mitzvah of Achnosas Orchim, guests, hosting guests. But then later on in the Parsha, we have the story of the way Hashem destroys Sodom. Now, as we mentioned last week, Lot, who is Avram's nephew, traveled and lived together in close proximity to Lot for years. Lot was an orphan from his father. That's another whole story. And he was brought up in his uncle's house. And then he himself became a businessman. And he had possessions. And he had herdsmen. And he had shepherds. And he had cattle. And there was a quarrel, as we saw in last week's Parsha. And then they parted ways. And then we saw from last week's Parsha that when Lot parted ways with Avraham, it was basically a rejection. That's what Rashi says of them. We mentioned it all last week. It was a rejection of Avraham's way of life and of Avraham's God, so to speak. That's what Rashi says. In other words, a rejection of Hashem and a rejection of the whole idea, really, of generosity, of selflessness, of kindness, etc. That's simply what it means, yes? And that's why, also, as we mentioned last week and Rashi mentioned, the reason how he became a captive etc., as we mentioned last week, was because he made these bad choices and he moved to Sodom. And what was Sodom? Sodom was a city which represented the total antithesis of everything that Avraham stood for. So what does it mean? It's not only that they parted ways, they went in total opposite directions. By Lot moving to Sodom, it means he's going to the sin city of the world, capital of crime, cruelty, etc. Now, what happens in this week's Parsha, my friends? After we mentioned in last week's Parsha, and how we spoke last week about Avraham going on Mesiras Nefesh, and that was the Rebbe's answer. In the Sikha of Lech Lecha, that he spoke Lech Lecha Tafshin Nun. Why does the Torah elaborate in the story of the wars, and how Avraham was victorious in the wars? And the answer is, last week I only explained the part because it shows on Avram's Mesiras Nefesh, self-sacrifice to rescue another, even against impossible, seemingly odds. Now, there's another major point what the Rebbe says over there. Listen to this. That this left an indelible impression on Lot. And therefore, when it comes to this week's Parsha, we see the following story. Two angels come to Sodom, and they come in front of Lot's house. And Rashi says, by the way, that day, Lot was appointed a judge. So that shows that he had much more to gain by being on good terms with the city. You know, like you have corruption. They say power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. So since Lot that day was appointed a judge, it would be more in his self-interest not to do anything that would upset the community where he's from, which is Sodom. Anyways, that day he was appointed a judge. The two angels come and they're standing there. Lot invites them to come into his house. And originally they don't want to go into his house. And obviously, Lot doesn't realize they're angels and the strangers. And Lot is risking his life to invite them into his house. But wait, there's more. In other words, he's risking his life because he's doing something which is the opposite of everything that city stands for. Sodom was all about cruelty, all about being a sadist. Everything was warped and perverted. To harbor a guest would be the biggest crime. The crime of hospitality. So here, Lot is inviting these two strangers into his house. But wait, there's more. Originally, they refused. They say, no, we won't stay in your house. And then the pasuk actually says these words. Vayiftzar bo ma'od. He urged them very much. And then they came into his house. So the reason why the pasuk is mentioning this is because even the mere fact alone that he offered them to come into his house was something which is, we'll call it, let's say, heroic and very nice. But the fact that they first refused, and then he insists, Vayiftzar bo ma'od, shows that he really, really went out of his way. And this was really, really a very honorable act. And when you say Vayiftzar bo ma'od, the word ma'od means exceedingly. So the question obviously is, why would Lot do that? It's contrary to everything that we said until now. He made the bad choice. He went to Stoim. He went to Sin City. He went into a community which is corrupt, and rotten to the core in the worst possible way. And he's comfortable there. That's a fact. And not only that, he's seen as one of the great citizens of that city. That's why they're making him a judge. You understand? And yet, nevertheless, in this case, he stretches out himself to go out and have self-sacrifice, so to speak, to invite these guests. And the Rebbe answers this question. The Rebbe asks this question. Why would he put himself in such a danger? Why would he risk his life? And we see what happens in the story, that they come, they gather around this house, they demand from him to bring out the guest. See there. So not only was it an intention to go on self-sacrifice, it was actual self-sacrifice because there was a major argument and a scuffle that happened right afterwards, etc. So the question is why? Why would he do that? And the Rebbe answers that question in the Sikh of Lech Chatav Shenun. That was because of the influence of Avraham. You know the words, and this is a tremendous lesson to all teachers and educators. We're not dealing with lights, we're dealing with Ben Avraham Yitzchak Yaakov, but nevertheless, sometimes you're dealing with a person. He's rejecting. He's running in the opposite direction. And you're thinking to yourself, what did you accomplish? What influence did you have? Comes along the lesson of the story of Lot. And this is what the Rebbe says, that it was because of Avram's general way of life of kindness and generosity that it left an impact and had an impression on Lot. But the most and the greatest and most powerful impact was when Avram showed and demonstrated complete self-sacrifice to go out and rescue Lot, like we learned in last week's Parsha. So that act of self-sacrifice touched and affected and influenced Lot. He didn't lose completely everything that Avram had taught him. Yes, he lived in Stoim. Yes, he was a star amongst the criminals, king criminal, king con, king crooked, king gangster. But there was some spark that was triggered, that when he saw these strangers, and he was brought up in Avram's house, and he had a role model of what it means to go on self-sacrifice for another person. So therefore, that self-sacrifice of Avram Avinu, love begets love, self-sacrifice begets self-sacrifice. That self-sacrifice of Avram to rescue life now ignited and became a catalyst and inspired Lot to go on self-sacrifice for these guests. So this is a tremendous lesson. And we have to always think about it. Very, very much so in our daily life. First, I'm going to say a vort that's brought down in the Sichas of the Frierdiker Rebbe. I'm going to read it to you inside, so don't think I made it up, and it's so powerful. The Frierdiker Rebbe says like this: By a Verbringen hat man amol geteicht. By a Verbringen, he means a Chassidic gathering. Once there was an interpretation given. Les smola b'hai atika. There's words that are Kabbalistic terms, which say less smola b'hai atika. There's no left in Atik. Atik is a very high, deep, Kabbalistic level. One could say it's the highest of the highest levels. Atik is Pnimius HaKeser, and Pnimius HaKeser is connected to Atzmus in a special way. So in other words, when we talk about the 10 Sefirot, and we go from Chachma to Malchus, higher than Chachma is Keser, and in Keser itself there's two levels, Arich and Atik. So Atik is the inner of the inner. And by the way, Ason, as we mentioned last week, we translated also ancient, is also connected to Atik. Atik could also be translated as ancient. But anyways, so there's a Kabbalistic term which says, a rule, less smaller b'hayatika, there's no left. Whatever that means, simply means there isn't gvura in Atik. There's no left in Atik, because gvura is from the left line. Okay? But then it's interpreted as follows. If meitig sein, Atik could also mean shift. It means, like for example, it's a hatak, it's a transcript. In other words, when you make an extract from one place and you put it in another place, an extraction, so to speak. But it means also a shift, taking from here to there. If meitig sein, if you want to move something, extract, avekruken, move away, which means change, to turn, to shift. Hein sich und hein yanim, whether talking about yourself, to make a change or a turn, or a shift, or another, is nit mit smell, no mit kiruv. It's not with left, but rather with closeness. So that's what it means. Less smaller b'hayatika. If you really, really want to affect an atik, to change someone, including yourself, less smaller. It's not going to come through smoil. Smoil represents harshness. Smoil represents punishment. Smoil represents fear. Smoil represents consequences, but usually negative consequences. So this is always something we have to always remember to ourselves again and again. Less smaller b'hayatika. If you ever really, really want to change somebody, it's not going to come through smoil. It's not going to come through being harsh, stern, disciplinarian. It's going to come through warmth, through closeness, through love. Now, this is not the time to get into it now. And as a matter of fact, in my work, I'm in Yeshiva Gedola, in the Zal, in the Besmedrish. And if I could say that one of the central themes that is like at the forefront of education is this balance between discipline and inspiration. And there's no question that you need both. And there's no question that in our day and age we need more love. But there's also no question that we also need discipline. There's no question about it. And I'm not here to solve the whole question in the scope of this talk. But this is the truth. That short term, it could be smaller works sometimes. Sometimes we see more immediate results through smaller, through consequences and stern, etc. But ultimately, there's no question about it that real change, long-term change, is only through love and through warmth, etc. Now, even in cases where sometimes you need a radical sort of approach, like yesh, miyesh la'ayim be'emtza. Sometimes you really want to make a change from one sort of change to another sort of change. It needs a state of nothingness in between. True. But that still has to be based on the idea of the love, of the ava. Okay? So therefore it doesn't change anything we're speaking about over here. So let's get back to our story. I love when you have a story from the Torah. It demonstrates this lesson. So this is the lesson over here concerning light and Avraham. That Avraham, because he was the paragon of kindness, sensitivity, warmth, care, concern, etc. Therefore, even the person who rejects and went to the other extreme, as in a city of cruelty, even he was influenced by Avram's love, generosity, and compassion. I want to say another thing, side point, and I never said this before, but in general, I believe that it's a good simon, it's a good sign to remember there are 3 E's. And if you remember these 3 E's, you have the story of Yiddishkeit, the story of everything, the secret of everything. And the 3 E's are enlightenment, empathy, and empowerment. And you could say Avraham Avinu represents all 3. Maskil is Avraham, that's enlightenment, which you could also say enlightenment means truth. That means enlightenment, when you see the truth. So you could say enlightenment is your moichin chabad, that's enlightenment, your intellect. Then comes empathy, that's your emotions, your midas, your chagas. And then comes empowerment, your nihi, your ability to carry it through. So Avram, who's the first Jew, represents all these 3. He's enlightenment, Avram, seichel hanela mikol rayon. It's explained in the Kabbalah that Avram was the greatest philosopher. Somebody at the deepest level of intellect with God. So that's his enlightenment. And then there's empathy. Avram oyavi, he's a lover. He's chesed. He's the epitome of chesed, as we spoke last week. So he's the ultimate of kindness and compassion and sensitivity and generosity. And then there's empowerment. Eson, he's strong. He has that neshama. He has the ability to carry through whatever values and virtues that he believes in to the very end. No matter what obstacles, trials and tribulations he will face, he will be able to implement and actualize whatever values and virtues are the truth. There's a Hayom Yom, by the way, speaking about this idea that Avram is the influencer. And that's what the Rebbe brings out in the Sikha of Vayeira, of Lech Lecha Tafshin Nun. The reason why in Parshas Lech Lecha it speaks about his war with the battles with the 4 kings and his influence on Lot is to bring out that point that in the end, Avram is the greatest role model. Yeah, Echadai Avram, as we spoke about last week. But the lesson is also about his influence, his influencing others, and everything was about that, because that's what Hashem wants. So there's a tremendous Hayom Yom. It could be I once mentioned this Hayom Yom before, Ches Tammuz, which only a Rebbe could say what he says here, because who are we to measure these things? And it says over there, see Hayom Yom, Ches Tammuz, Matzinu de Ikri Chibasi Shal HaKadosh Baruch Hu LaAvram Avinu Olav HaShalom Hoya L'man Sheyitzaveh Ki Pirushay Yechaber Es Bonav Es Beisai. The Pasuk says that Avram was beloved because he commanded, he gave over the values and virtues to his children and to his household and for generations. Okay, he gave over his way of life to his children. It continued. Jewish continuity. But listen to what he says over here. He commanded doesn't mean that he commanded. It means that he connected. What's Avram's greatest virtue? That he connected others to Hashem. Hainu. The whole Geidel Avedosei. Banisyoines. Eine be'erech legabe ho di yitzaver vi yechaber acherim. Mashi yizake acherim. This implies that all of Avram's tremendous heroic endeavors in the face of his trials pale in comparison to his commanding and connecting others by making them too meritorious. So this is beyond words. He's saying in this Hayom Yom that the fact that you go out and put on tefillin with another person, you connect another Yid with Hashem, when you have positive impact and bring benefit to another Yid, that's greater than the Akedah. These are not my words. These are the words of the Frierdiker Rebbe here in Hayom Yom. I'd like to finish off with one story in this vein about impacting and influencing through kindness. And that's another meaning of kindness warrior. You know, they say kill them with kindness. Don't kill them with kindness. Win them over with kindness. And that's what means a kindness warrior. You have a warrior mentality to gain, to advance, to triumph. But how? Through kindness. Kindness warrior. You're going to win over others through kindness. And that's what Avram did with Lot. There was a shliach from Eretz Yisrael. There is a shliach from Eretz Yisrael. I would say he's probably 10 years older than me, or in the neighborhood, maybe 7 years older than me. He's in Eretz Yisrael, and he used to visit Melbourne from time to time. He verbringed once. I would say his name, it's not a secret, but I can't say his name because I didn't ask him for permission. And he said that when he was becoming a Lubavitcher Chassid, he was having great difficulties with his parents, and it caused a great rift and tension in the house. So he wrote to the Rebbe about the problem that he's having with his parents. And the Rebbe gave him an answer of 3 points. And I thought the answer was brilliant. And it could apply to many, many people in many, many different areas of life, in fields, of business, in relationships. It's principles in dealing with difficult relationships, whether it's in a marriage, whether it's in business, whether it's with children, any sort of relationships. It's really about conflict resolution in a way. So this is what happens. The Shliach, who was a teenager then, who was becoming a Lubavitcher, he wrote to the Rebbe that he was having these difficulties, and the Rebbe answered 3 points. I don't have the exact answer. I wish I would have wrote down the exact wording of the Rebbe, but I'm reading to you what I wrote down from memory. The first thing the Rebbe told him was, don't get into arguments and debates. I think I remember that part of the answer was chekiris, vikuchim. Don't get into arguments, So many times that's one of the main problems when we come to difficulties. You're a vaxxer, you're an anti-vaxxer, you're whatever it is. Don't bring it up, don't talk about it, don't get into arguments. That's number one. Peace should reign in the household. Your parents don't want you to lead your life in a certain way. You want to lead your life in a certain way, which might even be better. Don't bring it up. Don't get into arguments or debates. The second thing the Rebbe told him was, be the ultimate role model of menschlichkeit and midos tovos. There's nothing that a parent wants more than to think and see their child as a mensch, as a ziser ingel. He's such a good-natured person. He always helps me out. He always asks me how I am. He always says, can I do something to help you? Can I do something to make your life easier? That idea. So that was the second answer the Rebbe was saying. And the third answer the Rebbe said was, see if you could find a third party. Another person that could talk to your parents maybe and show them how if you become a Lubavitcher, there's nothing wrong with it. On the contrary, it's great. So when I heard that answer, I thought to myself, wow. And I thought to myself, this applies to any situation. Think of yourself in your workforce. Are you having difficulties with a colleague or with a boss? Think of a marriage. Think of any interaction, interpersonal relationships. These 3 steps apply. Don't get into arguments and debates. Try to minimize arguments and debates no matter what. Second of all, just be a mensch. Always do the right thing. Always be the nice guy. And ultimately, if you do that, it'll be very, very hard for the other person's animosity or ill feelings towards you not to melt. To always stay strong and have all these complaints against you. And last but not least, find a third party. Sometimes you need a third party to talk to that person. So basically, one of the 3 points that the Rebbe says over here was the theme of today's whole talk, which is less small b'hayatika. How does Avraham influence even light? Through his kindness. The Rebbe should help. We should all improve in that area. We forget that the Rebbe said that what's going to bring Mashiach? Acts of goodness and kindness. The Rebbe meant acts of goodness and kindness, like smiling, like doing a favor. Pasha to Avos Yisrael, Maisim Toivim, Gemilas Chasadim. That all is in the category of acts of goodness and kindness. Let us all increase in acts of goodness and kindness, and this will guaranteed bring the Gula Mitzvah Shlema. Take it from Yad Mamish. Posting from my home, Be'ez Hashem Yisbarach, your man in Melbourne.